I have to work on my research, write an article for publication, fulfill the discipline's requirements to earn credits, volunteer for the NGO and the other one too, work, get some freelance work because my cat got sick and I need to pay the vet, attend to event X, work at event Y, help with this journal because it's good for my CV, and there's another event. I'll miss class again and have to catch up for the final essay because I only managed to read the first week's text and got lost after that. Wait, I also need to take care of my health. Do the monthly grocery shopping, skincare, yoga, cook, clean the house. What? Was there a report due this week? Oh, and tomorrow there's a lecture by that professor from another city. And I haven't finished the final report yet. What's the priority here? How do I set priorities among so many amazing things? Things I either need to do to graduate or get my degree, or because they feel like opportunities I can only seize right now.
You're listening to Homo Academicus, and today we're diving into the beautiful chaotic routine of the average university student. So go ahead and follow us on your favorite streaming platform and share this episode with that friend who could really use some help figuring out their academic priorities.
Has anyone out there figured out how to freeze time yet? Back in 2021, during the height of the pandemic, a text went viral in Brazil through Piau magazine titled, "Seems like a revolution, but it's just neoliberalism." It kicks off with a story about a student negotiating the number of readings they tackled that semester, proposing to split the workload and so on. The author interpreted this as a reflection of a market-driven culture, where students began to see themselves as clients, deciding what to consume and when. The piece sparked a wave of responses, rebuttals, counter-rebuttals, amazing. I think you've probably noticed by now that I love talking about this stuff. So of course, I find it amazing when people dive into debates about academic culture. What we're trying to highlight here is this. Let's reflect on how much of our struggle with time management stems from the mandatory demands of our courses, and how much comes from the broader context we're living in. From there, we can explore tools and work on building the skills needed to handle them, and ultimately, make peace with the 24 hours we have in a day. Maybe you've heard someone, or even said yourself, "What do you do from midnight to 6?" in response to someone complaining about their workload. It might start as a joke, but it can quickly turn into pressure or even outright exploitation as demands keep piling up. One thing to consider here is the high credit load required by certain programs, especially in graduate school. Some analyses suggest this happens to compensate for gaps often seen in basic education. On top of that, there's the added pressure from funding agencies and the academic programs themselves, which need to increase or maintain their rankings. To do that, they rely on high productivity from both students and faculty. And let's not forget about all the bureaucratic tasks that they're still expected to complete. These elements are a recipe for suffocating anyone's schedule.
In the graduate program at the Polytechnic School, we must take 5 courses in the master's program and 4 in the PhD program. Even though it might sound manageable at first, these courses are extremely demanding. Taking just 2 courses at a single term can easily require about 20 hours of studying per week, leaving little time for research by itself. Unlike undergraduate studies, in graduate school, you also need to score an A grade, above 80%, which is crucial for applying for a PhD or postdoctoral scholarships later. This adds a huge amount of pressure on students. There is no room for mistakes. On top of that, we also have periodic reports to submit. In engineering, where focus often leans toward industry, it's common for companies to have contracts and finance research centers. This means students must submit reports to these funding companies and to the government research agencies. These projects are often more attractive for students because they have more budget for equipment and conference travels. So we have to juggle courses, events, reports, learning how to make purchase and quotations for the university, accumulating responsibilities, but without compromising academic performance, producing publications and papers, and doing all that for a scholarship that don't even cover our rent. I went through all this by myself. And while I managed to get through it, it came at a high cost. My physical and mental health suffered. I gained over 45 pounds and had to start therapy to deal with anxiety and eating disorders.
You have just heard Lucas Neves, a doctoral student in the Mechatronics Engineering program at the Polytechnic School of University of São Paulo, in Brazil. You don't even need to be the course professor to notice when someone hasn't been able to keep up with the reading for that subject. Sometimes you even wish you could debate an amazing text with a classmate, but when you get there, you're faced with the harsh reality that no one else read the text but you, and that's pretty frustrating, right? Only those who had been to a book club where no one actually read the book will know the feeling. The truth is that for everyone, both students and professors, it's always tough to organize their own time and priorities. And not everyone has the same 24 hours. A significant portion of undergraduate and graduate students in Latin America need to work and study at the same time. In the latest UNESCO report on the profile of university students in the region, they mention they do not have a comprehensive statistics for the entire region. However, they mentioned the case of a group of universities in Argentina that were being analyzed, where about 70% of students in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year of 3 university programs were working and studying. The same study says that students who work tend to develop poor eating, sleeping, and resting habits, which are often accompanied by their consumption of alcohol and tobacco. All these factors lead to health issues that in turn affect their studies and work.
During the final semesters of my chemical engineering degree, I was doing my internship while also working on my graduation project. During this period, I spent almost the entire day juggling these 3 commitments, and it was incredibly challenging to manage it all. And there's the fact that I had moved from another city, so I had to use the money from my internship to cover my rent, meals, and all the other expenses. It was overwhelming and very stressful, especially when I realized I could not have enough by the end of the month. As the month progressed, things would start running out. My pantry was really limited, often with just a bit of meat or a few vegetables. And in my free time, I still had housework to do. I had to cook, clean the house, do the laundry, not to mention the assignments and other tasks that were just piling up. It was honestly a tough time. I even got sick because I didn't have the time to eat properly or take care of myself. That's how my final semesters of undergrad played out.
The story of Hector Mendoza that you heard in Tomás Friseiro's voice reminded me of the song of Sancocho by Santiago Benavides. Sancocho is a very popular dish in the Caribbean region, a soup. And in the song, he talks about James, a boy who was starting university and, on his way back from classes, would surprise his mother by bringing his hungry classmates to eat with them.
Todo empezó un día al iniciar la universidad, cuando James supo de un compañero en necesidad. Y aunque en su casa casi no había nada, le dijo que andara a ver qué pasaba. La mamá de James lo esperaba para almorzar. Aquel día había aún más poco que lo normal. Tremenda sorpresa al abrir la puerta y ver a su hijo con visita hambrienta.
In addition, there are also domestic demands, such as cleaning and meal preparation, which often fall on women, not to mention the mothers.
O que a minha pesquisa identificou através de relatos.
What my research identified through the testimonies of women who became mothers during their undergraduate studies or who entered the university as mothers is that, in general, the academy, the university, and the academic space is an extremely violent space.
De violências simbólicas, mas de violências muito significativas.
One of symbolic violence, but of very significant violence that exclude this woman from the inside. Exclusion from the inside is a concept addressed by Bourdieu, which explains the student who is excluded, but is still within the space. They're benefiting from the space they have been inserted, they have access, but at the same time, they cannot fully be there, comply with all the norms, meet all the deadlines, affiliate, and they end up becoming an excluded person from the inside.
Os instrumentos de opressão, as violências simbólicas.
The instruments of oppression, the symbolic violence that is embedded both in the physical structure of universities, such as the lack of changing rooms, lactation rooms, the inability for students to attend classes with their children or to feed them in the campus cafeteria, and subjective issues, such as the professor who complains about the baby crying or who says they don't like children in the classroom, or the professor who complains or gives a, let's say, punishment, a reprimand to a mother who had to miss class to take her children to school, or who didn't meet a work deadline because she's pregnant and had to go to an appointment. These are various symbols and several instruments of oppression, which end up making this space very violent. This creates extreme difficulty for these women who exist in those spaces, a tremendous suffering that only changes when this woman finds a mother's movement, a maternal organization that will support, welcome, and give her the conditions to continue her academic journey and graduate.
Siga o percurso acadêmico dela e se forme.
You just heard Marcela Marcos bringing the English version of Ivana Moura's story. Ivana is a researcher in maternity and persistence at Pontifical Catholic University from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And these cases she mentions help us see that universities need to improve their retention policies, and that university is not just about the classroom, it's also commuting time, going back and forth, study time at home or in the library for an exam, cooking, breastfeeding in the case of mothers, producing end-of-semester papers, writing articles, working on thesis. Phew! And there's less and less time left for creativity, for the encounters that enhance academic production, for rest, for leisure. Because after all, learning to manage time isn't just about allowing us to produce more, right?
A questão do gerenciamento do tempo.
On the subject of time management, I think the big problem has to do with an ideology of time management.
You are listening to Robson Cruz by Josué Olmedo's voice.
Ou seja, você nunca teve tanto discurso.
In other words, there has never been so much talk, there have never been so many tools, so many publications on time management, and it has never been so difficult to manage time. And then we started to think also in a more micro context. I think often this topic shows how we disconnect macro-structural problems for individual psychological problems in academic life. In this sense, time management today is an ideology. The idea has been created that time management is just a matter of knowing how to manage time and not the absurd increase of daily microactivities that did not exist 20 years ago, or even less than 20 years ago. So, we are a generation in which there is a constant idea that I must be able to manage time while there is an imposition for us to deal with tasks that we did not deal with at the same speed before and that did not even exist a few decades ago. If we imagine communication, for example, we can imagine that a subject before the internet, a person before the internet, which is something very close in time, would arrange a meeting to talk about something, for example, with his or her tutor. Today, if you have a supervisor and an advisor, you can have 10 conversations, 10 messages in 5 minutes by WhatsApp, email, or social networks. So the big issue for me is to produce a greater sense of plausibility about time, remembering that we still have other issues about that. The idea is that I am able not only to do, but to be several things. This phenomenon seems, for example, very recurrent in an ideology of multiple identity in terms of activities. Nowadays, it is not uncommon to see on people's resumes or on their social media profiles that they have a bachelor's degree, a PhD, and 5 other things. I know this has to do with work, with the need to work, but you see people who want to be things that demand a lot. Like, for example, you will see a profile where the person is a PhD student, an artist, DJ, a tattoo artist, among other things. And then I wonder when this person will be able to do a thesis. She won't be able to do it. Just dedicating yourself to the thesis is hard enough, considering that most of us have to do the thesis or dissertation and keep working.
As students, researchers, and professors, part of our time is managed autonomously. It's up to us to organize it, which gives it a certain flexibility. This flexibility can sometimes create a false impression for those outside academy that our time isn't fully committed, that we're always available. Rarely do we have the clock in, so if we're not the ones planning our times, who will? And if we don't plan our work time, how can we even begin to plan the rest we need? If we don't plan our time, no one will plan our rest for us. On top of that, a 2020 eMarketer report found that Latin Americans spend a significant amount of time on streaming services and social media. On average, they dedicate 3 hours and 31 minutes to social media and messaging apps, and 1 hour and 35 minutes to streaming and online TV. If you want to be shocked, just check your phone screen time tracker. How much time you spend on your phone daily, and which apps consume most of that time. It's not just about the time spent on these apps, but also how they're shaping the way we engage with the world. And no, this does not apply only to teenagers. Our attention span has drastically shortened due to the consumption of short videos that hook us within the first few seconds. And before we know it, we're scrolling endlessly from one video to another. All this influences how we perceive time. It's no wonder we often delay starting or finishing a task, even resting itself, by distracting ourselves with our phones. And let's be real, you can even procrastinate with useful tasks. Who hasn't cleaned the house or baked the cake just to avoid starting that reading? Although procrastination is a significant topic when it comes to time management, we won't delve into it here. Instead, we will leave some reading material and a reflective exercise about self-sabotage on our website. You will find the link in the episode description. One of the challenges we've heard from students and researchers is the lack of loss of focus. And they are absolutely right. This is one of the biggest enemies of time management. When we are unsure of what we want or what we're doing, anything can seem like a good idea. Or not, right? That's why we'll keep hammering home the importance of research planning and text planning. Planning your research or writing, especially for smaller end of semester assignments, for instance, helps clarify your focus. It makes it easier to decide which courses to take and which elective and extracurricular activities beyond the mandatory ones to get involved in. Of course, we need to leave some room for flexibility, even to enrich our research. Getting involved in activities that are not exactly connected to our primary focus can bring fresh perspectives and help us generate new ideas. Even so, it's crucial to establish a clear direction for what we want to achieve, so we know how far we can stretch and, more importantly, where to return to. Otherwise, we end up bouncing from one thing to another, from field to field, and before we know it, boom, the end of semester deadlines hit, the qualifications deadlines approaches, and the final deadline is around the corner, and our brain feels like a headless chicken. Sure, extracurricular activities are important, but how many of them do we actually need? Some commitments we take on are short-term, others stretch over a semester, a year, or even longer. Try this exercise. Take all your commitments out of your head and put them down on paper. This will help you visualize just how much of your time is already spoken for. And I'm not just talking about commitments like meetings or classes, but also deadlines for articles, reports, or your thesis, be it undergrad, master's, or PhD. After all, those are things that require a significant chunk of time to get done, right? Remember when I mentioned earlier how important it is to get involved in different activities to bring in fresh insights? Well, being able to see when you'll have more time or less time on a list or on a calendar can really help you understand your limits. It also gives you the flexibility to decide when and how to engage in those different opportunities. You have probably heard the phrase work while they sleep, as a reference to prioritizing work over rest. It's true that at certain times we'll need to study or work more intensely. But if that becomes our only priority, we risk overloading ourselves and neglecting the things that bring meaning to our lives. And that's not something that has a very positive consequence for our health. Overload can be accompanied by stress and exhaustion, which can harm our relationships, our health, and even our work. Setting boundaries with studies, work, and planning moments of rest into your routine is an act of courage that will allow you to find more balance and be better equipped to continue growing. When we talk about rest, it's not just about sleeping or sitting in the couch watching a streaming service. It's about doing meaningful activities for you, like having a coffee with a friend you haven't seen in ages, going to a park and doing some outdoor activity, going to the movies, reading a book that's not related to your studies while sitting on the porch, or playing something with your friends, etc. The key to rest is reconnecting with yourself, and for that, you need to know which type of activity helps you relax at each moment. That's it. We don't want you to study and work while others sleep, but rather to remember that rest is essential to nurture the dreams of your day. I know I'm being repetitive here, but once again, if you don't include rest in your time management, no one else will do it for you. If you're thinking about how to deal with the various demands of university in a more practical way, we have separated some strategies that might help you in your process of learning to be a researcher, professor, and student. We don't believe it's possible to completely control time, nor is this a proposal to simply increase productivity in that coach vibe. We're talking about time management strategies because we believe that when we better understand our time, how we handle each activity and our limits, we can live, work, and study with more quality. After all, it also helps us remember the importance of rest. If you're having trouble concentrating on your studies, your study environment might be getting in the way. And by that, I don't mean you need a fancy office just for studying. You can start with small steps, like tidying up your desk, for instance. How about giving your study area a quick cleanup, keeping only the computer, books, and notebooks you actually need? And here's that classic piece of advice. Keeping your phone out of reach might also be great to avoid distractions. Just saying. Speaking of distractions, it's worth figuring out if you focus better in a quieter space too. If a quiet space at home isn't an option for you, the university library can be a great alternative. Another thing we hear a lot is the idea that doing research or graduate studies is inevitably a solitary endeavor. Does it really have to be? Of course, it's important to spend time alone, but it doesn't always have to be that way. You can team up with classmates or friends, even if they're from different fields, to study or write together using the Pomodoro method, for example. You can do this in the library or even book a room on campus. Have you noticed that there are people who perform better at the gym when they are with others? Some people even do this online via Discord. This is what they call body doubling. You sort of mirror the other person, and it motivates you to push through your tasks. Here's a simple example. You leave your house to meet a study buddy, and you see him focused, writing away. You're not going to pick up your phone and procrastinate while he's working, are you? You naturally fall into the same rhythm. One inspires the other, and you can even use the breaks to share some uplifting cheap talk. Now, if you feel like you can't focus on the same task for too long, and envy your peers who can concentrate on one thing for over an hour, don't worry, okay? That's completely normal. A helpful strategy to avoid getting too tired and giving up on the task at hand is setting a timer to study for 25 or 30 minutes, followed by a short 5-minute break. It might sound trivial, but breaking your work into smaller chunks and including short breaks helps your brain absorb new and challenging information better. Take some time to observe yourself as well. You might find that working in 1-hour blocks followed by a break works better for you. Speaking of breaking study sessions into smaller chunks, did you know that a great strategy for managing your workload is to break down large tasks into smaller, more manageable parts? Imagine this scenario. You're in a bike trail and face 2 paths leading to the same destination. The first has several smaller hills with rest areas in between, while the second is a single steep mountain. Now tell me, which path would you feel more capable and motivated to take? Probably the first one, right? Research works in a similar way. Breaking down large tasks or activities into smaller weekly portions can help us stop procrastinating because it makes progress feel more tangible, boosting our confidence. Have you ever noticed that you learn more in subjects where you're required to submit weekly assignments based on the material being studied? In addition to the obligation of submitting assignments, this happens because we feel more motivated when we have slightly smaller, manageable goals that are still challenging, rather than facing one massive task that we don't know how to start. On my journey to manage my time better, one thing that really helped is understanding how long it takes me to complete tasks. For example, before I tell myself, I'll read this text in the morning before class, I need to actually look at it, scheme through it, and assess whether it's a quick read or something I'll need to revisit multiple times to fully get it. I know it's not easy and still feels like a pretty abstract calculation, but another example might be that depending on the topic of the text I need to write on, I'll also try to think like, okay, I can talk about this topic for hours so the writing will flow easily. Or, to write about this, I'll need to read X, Y, and Z so the process will be slow. This has been helping me cultivate the virtue of prudence and focus when taking on commitments. Even if it's an amazing opportunity, what are the chances my brain will become an alphabet soup if I take on something I can't handle? Or if this opportunity is so incredible that I can't pass it up, is there something I can set aside without making it a habit of always dropping things when something seemingly better comes along so I can embrace this opportunity? How can I get enough wisdom to make these kinds of decisions? To make better use of our time, we need to develop focus and attention. And these are virtues, even though they might not seem like it at first. In this age of social media addiction and dopamine-driven habits, the phenomenon of FOMO, fear of missing out, has become widespread. It's that fear of not keeping up with the updates and events, which drives people to obsessively check social media several times a day and stay connected as much as possible. With all this, focus and attention have become increasingly rare virtues. This lesson came from Ana Becerra Felicio, a doctor in linguistics and research emotions in Seneca.
Let's start with definitions. Focus is the readiness to be present, keeping distractions away. To stay focused on an activity, it's important to pay attention to your emotions. As contradictory as it may seem, emotions provide focus. And for a long time, people believed that emotion worked against rationality, interfering with right judgment or attention to what really matters. But the truth is that emotion influences the configuration and composition of the thought. In other words, there is no thought without emotion. Emotions spark interest and the desire to understand, driving us to learn, read, and explore a specific topic. And this is all tied to intelligence. Who hasn't felt anxiety disrupting their focus and concentration? Raise your hand. Just as emotion can hinder us, they can also help us. That's why reflecting on the emotions you feel as you prepare for a task can be a useful exercise. What am I feeling? What motivates me to complete this task? And motivation can be as simple as, I need to deliver this by tomorrow. A sense of urgency can be a powerful motivation, but it's better if it doesn't always come to that, right?
To develop any intellectual virtue, practice is essential. All intellectual virtues are cultivated and learned. No one is born with them. At first, practice won't be perfect. It will be full of mistakes and questionable motivations, but we have to start somewhere. Having good information is an excellent first step. From there, practice becomes key, and having role models we admire can make a significant difference. None of us develops in a vacuum, so cultural context within communities are essential. Sometimes sharing your schedule with a trusted friend who can give you a gentle nudge when you need to stop procrastinating can help. The truth is, developing prudence and knowing when to take on commitments and when not to is something that requires many mistakes. Yeah, one of the most challenging skills to develop is learning how to say no to things. Sometimes we overestimate our ability to manage time, and sometimes we underestimate it. The truth is, only by hitting a few bumps along the way will we learn how long it takes to complete each task. and after making some mistakes, we will be able to take on the right number of commitments. This practical wisdom that allows us to discern situations will only come with time. But in summary, don't be alone. Don't isolate yourself. Look for role models and people who inspire you. Analyze the good habits you already have, and practice those habits with even more intentionality. When we hear about prudence, it sometimes seems like a very abstract concept, right? But the truth is, it guides very tangible things, like our weekly schedule. These virtues help us make decisions, and connecting with something we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, do we really need to get involved in all of this? What can I set aside or save for another stage of my life? Well, we're going to wrap it up here, but click on the link in the episode description to visit our website. There, you will find other exercises to help you take some time to reflect on your routine and organization, as well as the exercise I mentioned earlier. And of course, you can also check out the dialogue guide with the questions you can use in your Homo Academicus listening club.
You've been listening to Homo Academicus, hosted by Alejandro Ortiz, Spanish hosting by Esteban Muñoz, script and Portuguese hosting by Débora Vieira, script support by Robson Cruz, Ana Bezerra Felício, and Raquel Maia, resource support by Ana Bezerra Felício, Débora Vieira, Elisa Ferres, José Almeida, and Raquel Maia, script review by Frederico Lopes, media outreach by Elisa Ferres and Lorena Brondani, editing and distribution by Laura Bieber, graphic and web design by Amanda Lopes, English translation by Tomás Friseiro, Spanish translation by Débora Vieira. The Homo Academicus podcast is a project founded by the John Templeton Foundation and does not necessarily reflect on the Foundation's opinion. Visit the website at homoacademicus.org to learn more about us and find our resources.